Hello, and welcome to Varn Blog. Sometimes events happen that throw my videos off course. I had 2 videos coming up at the end of this week. I'm having to re-record them because the assassination attempt on Donald Trump may or may not change the logic I was talking about originally. But there's a lot more trends to look at and a lot more to think about now. And so I'm going to condense some of my talking points from those 2 videos that were released to my patrons because I'm not sure if they're going to be relevant or not. And I'm going to release a new video for you, the public, today. I never wanted to be a pundit. I think pundits, by and large, get their popularity from catering to the biases of their audience. They are given towards audience capture. They're given towards ideological capture. And in fact, in many ways, to be unique and wrong is rewarded in punditry the same way it is rewarded on Twitter or Facebook. That doesn't matter whether the punditry is right, left, center, far right, or Marxist. It's going to often be the case that we remember what we like about it and forget what we don't, or if we're inclined to hate the pundit, to remember what we don't like about them and to ignore what they get right. Furthermore, the curation of social media does have an effect on the presentation of ideology. Whether you want to talk about hegemony or the ideological apparatuses or whatever, what social media proves is these are fragmented and slippery things, and that algorithmic reinforcement often means that people have to differentiate themselves in such a way as to attract an audience by both negative partisanship and hope grifts. This means conspiratorial thinking is proliferated. This means overemphasis on hegemonic narratives to kind of fight this. This means niche specialization, being rewarded by not thinking about the parts of society that you're not a specialist in and just repeating the gust of popular sentiment, a phrase I use a lot. I have no idea what the real meaning or ideology of the Trump shooter is. But I can tell you that the proliferation of conspiracy theories, in light of what seems to be maybe just generic incompetence, not just on the right, where people would seemingly expect it, but with PhD academics picking on Blue Anon conspiracies that Trump did this to make himself more popular. Sorry to say, but getting hit in the ear is awfully close to your brain for it to be fake. But what are you going to do? There's also the general braying for political violence that you sometimes see. It might not be common, or it might be common, but it happens when people are used to expressing their politics in the form of 15-minute hate rallies that they give on social media because negative partisanship gives them a dopamine hit. When I, on 2 forms of social media, said be self-disciplined and reserve judgment a little bit on anything the day after it happened, I literally got people laughing at me. Now, I don't think the discourse actually matters all that much. And in fact, I'm not sure this even changes the likely outcome of the election. Biden's flaws are on full display to see. The GOP platform didn't actually contain much of Project 2025 in it. There is a need and a push for the executive to actually use its privilege as opposed to respecting norms that have never been enshrined in law, while liberals are decrying this as a coup. It's not a coup. The overuse of one non-democratic form of the executive branch against the other non-democratic branch, which often is appointed by the executive, is hardly something we should be excited about. And yet, most radicals have taken the Weberian stance that the way that you protect demagoguery is through the civil service. Or protect from demagoguery, but the from or is actually unclear. Furthermore, it's been made very apparent that the borderline between large corporations and the state, just like they were in the high period of Fordism, have been increasingly thinned. Censorship doesn't need to be formal when the state can ask members and owners of businesses to do it for them. Now, that's not new. It's not new. But a few times in history have so many people depended on corporate mediated websites to function as something like a public square. And to pretend and curate themselves as if they were ideological pundit personalities. And to say things as facts which they cannot know. That so much of the leadership is also pertaining to this just illustrates the craven nature of the dependency within these apparatuses. They have been protected from the public so much that they feel like they can pick up the public vices to manipulate it. As for Trump, odds are he will be the next president of the United States. His platform is not the Project 2025 platform at all. But who knows what he will do, particularly now, after this one event. But I'm going to read something to you from right-wing media to help you understand what Trumpism is and isn't. Whether or not it's fascist, I have no idea what people mean by that. The relevant criteria of fascism is hotly debated in academic circles, but seems to be vibes. But regardless, if you wanted to stand up against Make America Great Again as a movement and not, say, a meme like many of the other things that have been imagined on the left as basically marketing techniques, you have to ask yourself what this is. Was the shooter a libertarian, a Lincoln Project Republican, a confused 20-year-old kid? He's dead. So we're unlikely to know since he left no manifesto and you're reading lipstick traces and breadcrumbs. Biden seems to be able to put up no offense and barely any defense even before this happens. And if Axios is correct, some key House Democrats have already basically conceded the election. Many of the legal cases put up against Trump seem to be falling apart. And we haven't even got to the appeals court yet, nor the understanding of the judiciary. But let's look at what was in the GOP platform, because it is not Project 2025. This is from Reloaded, which is a gun rights magazine. In its first official platform since 2016, the Grand Old Party slashed all mention of its gun policy positions. The Republican National Committee Platform Committee, that's the redundant title, voted 84-18 overwhelmingly on Monday to adopt a new 2024 platform language after skipping the process entirely in 2020. The finalized document leans into former President Trump's America First outlook and parrots many of his stances on issues ranging from immigration to trade. It, however, also minimizes the party's emphasis on gun policy compared to its previous platform. The entire platform discusses gun rights just once in a preamble statement that says the party's dedication to defending our fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to keep and bear arms. The final product omits any discussion of tangible gun policy ideas. The Republican Party's platform downplaying the Second Amendment issues comes as gun rights movement finds itself in a precarious position politically. As guns have become increasingly polarized among party lines, gun rights supporters have found themselves reliant on Republicans for political support. President Joe Biden has made gun control a fixture of his tenure in office, asterisk. He hasn't done anything about it, though, an asterisk, and is already campaigning even more sweeping proposals, including a ban on the sales of the popular AR-15 and the second presidential term, asterisk. I have no idea what Senate he's going to be able to do that with, an asterisk. At the same time, while the GOP's current standard bearers continue to seek the support of the National Rifle Association and make promises to speeches to the group, he has been fickle on gun policy at times. His felony conviction also means he can no longer legally own or possess firearms. The 2024 platform's cursory discussion of gun policy priorities marks a significant departure from the party's 2016 platform. The party previously dedicated an entire section to the Second Amendment. In it, the GOP listed pro-gun policies it wanted to enact, as well as gun control measures it opposed. We support firearm reciprocity legislation to recognize the right of law-abiding Americans to carry firearms to protect themselves and their families in all 50 states, the 2016 document reads. We support constitutional carry statutes and salute the states that have passed them. We opposed ill-conceived laws that restrict magazine capacity or ban the sale of the most popular and common modern rifle. The section continues. We oppose any effort to deprive individuals of the right to keep and bear arms without due process of law. We contend from frivolous lawsuits against gun manufacturers and the current administration's illegal, that was the Obama administration, harassment of firearm dealers. We oppose federal licensing or registration of law-abiding gun owners, registration of ammunition, or restoration of the ill-fated Clinton gun ban. I'm going to say the Clinton gun ban didn't do that much, to be quite frank. The RNC did not respond to a request for a comment about the party dropping gun rights priorities from its platform. However, in a press release, the RNC chairman Michael Whatley and co-chair Laura Trump called a bold new roadmap that will undo the devastating damage that Joe Biden's far-left policies, that's funny, have done to this country, power that President Trump to a historic victory in November and make America great again. The GOP's platform stood in stark contrast to the Democratic Party platform, which dedicated several paragraphs to endorsing gun control policies aimed at ending the epidemic of gun violence. Democrats will enact universal background checks and sales of online gun and ammunition, close dangerous loopholes that allow current stalkers, abuse partners, and some individuals convicted of assault or battery to buy and possess firearms, and adequately fund federal background check system. The 2020 platform reads, Democrats will ban the manufacture and sale of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, will incentivize states to enact licensing requirements for owning firearms and extreme risk protection order laws to allow courts to temporarily remove guns from the possession of those who are a danger to themselves or others. The GOP's 2024 platform, being nearly silent on gun policy, was not the only stance of the party leaning away from its traditional issues and stance. The updated platform also features notably softened language on abortion restriction, a move that reflects former Trump's recent sidelining of the pro-life movement. While the party's 2016 platform endorsed a federal abortion ban after 20 weeks, the updated document codified Trump's preference to leave the issue to the states. As I predicted, it works out for both Democrats and Republicans. It also endorsed protections for birth control and fertility treatments like in vitro fertilization, asterisk, because it became a mess in Alabama and is wildly unpopular there. The updated platform also removed the party's previous opposition to same-sex marriage, its emphasis on reducing the national debt, and its vision for entitlement reform. Instead, the platform explicitly called for the complete completion of Social Security and Medicare without any cuts or retirement age adjustments, a longtime Trump priority. The Trump campaign celebrated the first draft of the platform and emphasized that the former Trump's personal influence on its contents. President Trump's 2024 Republican Party platform articulates his vision to make America great again in a way that is concise and digestible for every voter. Trump campaign senior advisor Chris Lefsiva and Susie Wells said in the press release. While Joe Biden and the Democrats argue about who will be at the top of the ticket and have implemented policies that have raised prices on everyday lives, open the floodgates to migrant crime via wide open borders. I mean, they adopted 2016 Trump policies, but as I said, when you play that game, the only way it can move is right. Shackled every American energy with red tape forced by Washington bureaucrats and sown chaos through the world through weak foreign policy. Trump will make America great again through these America First principles. You will notice a movement in both Republicans from specific to vaguer notions. The enemy, I think, for a lot of these people will be basically wokeism, which is something that has historical meaning in different time periods, going all the way back to the 1960s, but is a flexible concept, just like politically correct was in the 90s. And in fact, if anything, it's the same thing. You take a criticism that emerged from critics within the left or within liberal spheres, you reappropriate it to attack the left broadly with it and keep its definition vague. So the friend-enemy distinction can morph without any substantive movement. But what has been the success of anti-Trumpism? Is Trump not a symptom of American decadence? But if he is, so is Joe Biden. A party that in 2020 could not stop a presidential candidate who had failed 2 times before, been reintegrated into the Obama campaign, and who was very, very old, whose policies, victories were mostly in his first 100 days, and a lot of which were undone due to one senator. And I was led to believe by many that 6 or 8 House Democrats could move the Progressive Caucus and thus the rest of the DNC leftward. How serious was that? 1 senator, too. Just 1. Bernie Sanders. And they all kissed the ring because they were afraid, seemingly, I'm speculating here, I actually don't know this, but they seem to be afraid of the chaos that having a primary would ensue, of maybe even more right-wing parts of the Democrats being able to take power. But that would indicate, sincerely, that they're only popular in coastal regions. New York, California, Washington, Oregon, maybe urban enclaves throughout major states, but that is really it. The numbers have not looked good for Democrats because they haven't been able to deliver on anything. And the responses to it have been radicalization. But radicalization in what sense? Mostly hot air. New institutions have not been born. The DSA is at war with itself, hemorrhaging money. Unclear if it's hemorrhaging members or not. It seems to be. Maybe that has slowed, but it was definitely in the last 2 years. That's why it's hemorrhaging money. With constant battles in public between electoralists and people who want a more radical vision for a new socialist republicanism, small r. Meanwhile, people who've gone into legacy organizations that have recently had conferences like the CPUSA have discovered that the old guard is very much not going anywhere, despite all the new members. There's the fact that Sean Fain seems to be under a corruption probe that is by a monitor that seems to have been appointed by the ADL and moved from trying to go after him on Gaza to appointments to family members. And who knows if it's true or not. But it's clear that it was found out in order to discredit Sean Fain. He's also hit a wall with his strategy the UAW was attempting in the South, as Southern state legislatures have been changing the rules on them, something they're entirely empowered to do. While Bernie Sanders once again promises that Joe Biden will enact the PRO Act in a second term, when there's almost statistically no way for him to keep the Senate. I'm tired of being lied to, aren't you? But it's easy to get lost in the dialogue. Because let's be frank here. I don't spend my life on Twitter. I spend a lot more time on Twitter in the summer because in the summer I only have one job, this one, not two. After all, I'm a teacher. I'm a union rep as well. And I deal with normal people, whatever the fuck that actually means to you. But what I can tell you is, in the over 35 crowd, these ideologies you see online are not generally reflected, nor are people's ideologically commitments that coherent. Someone might read George Will and Evola now, and also kind of agree with Tucker Carlson, but maybe like Bernie Sanders sometimes. Yet you have people trying to enforce partisan consistency on people who generally don't have it. Part of this is from the extension of adolescence from the hardship of the American economy. When you need to make $120,000 to spend half of your income on housing in some cities if you want to buy, and you need to make $100,000 to be able to rent in some cities, and we're not even talking about New York or LA or San Francisco or Seattle. We're talking about my city, Salt Lake City, or Atlanta, or Houston, cities that were not historically high cost. When there's no way to build wealth, the incentive to participate in the economy goes down. Something like 10% of men under 55 are permanently out of the workforce. According to the Brookings Institute, there's a lot of reasons for this. We've seen since 2016 millions of men dropping out of the workforce, leaving companies struggling to fill jobs. There are more jobs than workers, even if there's less jobs than there seem. In fact, jobs are often being posted now as a way for internal workforce control, as has been reported elsewhere, and I'll get to that in a minute. But we also see that there are real deficiencies. Despite the fact that automation makes most production less obvious, and despite what you hear on all kinds of things from Twitter to TikTok about how America doesn't make things anymore, it's still the second largest, most industrially productive society on the planet next to China. Now, China has a lot more internal capacity than it does, but everybody's got demographic bombs going off, so it's something you need to think about. But when you come here, we have known that we've been losing women from the workforce in recent years, actually, because of the cost of childcare. And I do know many teachers and whatnot who've retired because, or well, not retired, just left, because we can see clearly that childcare costs more than college for a lot of young moms. And why not just stay home? But what about the men? And it's not just that people don't want to work anymore. It's that what reason do they have to work? People feel fed up and taken for granted, and they see no way to get any kind of middle class, whatever that means, life. So there's more and more time devoted to leisure time. What else is there to do? So when you look at 1953, 98% of men between the ages of 25 and 54 were working. Today, 7.2 million men have essentially dropped out of the workforce. This is why people think that all the jobs are going to immigrants, because they can leverage the difference in pricing parity. So no wonder things are ideologically insane, because particularly people under 35 are often going what might be called an extended adolescence. This has been known and talked about for a while. But to really put this in perspective, we have to remind ourselves it's not that America's not making anything. After all, in 2022, manufacturing contributed $2.3 trillion to GDP, 11% of the total GDP, and included both direct and indirect value added. Manufacturing contributes 24% of GDP when you talk about finishing. If you want to see my source for these stats, let me share them with you. You can also check all my links in the show notes. This is from NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. According to the current population survey, there's 15.2 million employees in the U.S. in manufacturing, representing 9.6% of the total workforce. Now, that's not a huge portion of the workforce compared to the portion of the GDP it is, and you can thank automation for that. Now, automation is a fixed form of capital. It's hard to see where the profits are going there, but it is what it is. U.S. ranks 10th in the Made in Country Index, meaning we are beginning to kind of resettle our trade imbalance, although that's not going to change anytime real soon. And if people like J.D. Vance have anything to say about it, they might try to even figure out ways to try to manipulate the currency, which will be incredibly hard to do as long as it's free floating. They'd have to do it through policy means, and that's complicated, so that you can get more domestic exports from the U.S. and get it back on the export market. I don't know that that's going to be really easy to do, particularly when all the protectionist tariffs going on and China's relatively advanced production capacity, but nonetheless, that does seem to be part of the mission. To some degree, you have to accept that we are going to go through a pivot, that the Cold War liberal apparatus that was codified in the 1960s and 70s and realigned with Reaganism and Clintonism is going away, but what is replacing it is probably not what you have thought. That there's large parts of the population engaged in politics as a form of entertainment, including, frankly, much of my audience. That labor militancy has been poorly captured on by the current union movement, and no matter what people say about that and electeds as means to practical achievement, they are just as much cars players and LARPists as the most revolutionary poster. And you can put all those in quotation marks. Why? Because they are in niche bubbles that have a hard time dealing with the situation at hand. You need multiple institutions and real relationships to make this work. Now, I'm frustrated with the entire spectrum of politics in most of the English-speaking world, not just the U.S., I may add. A lot of people think that I am only concerned about this in the U.S. I am not. I am tired of hope grifts. Not because people don't need hope, but it needs to be based on something real. And if you want to change the world, you have to know where you really are, not project your hopes upon it. You need institutions, you need leadership, and you need to be able to have those institutions be accountable and the leadership be accountable, which people seem very bad at doing one or the other. The people who critiqued the old Democratic Party often make the same arguments against people critiquing them that they attack the DNC with, because they don't have a good argument either, and they don't have institutional forces either. My point has been the entire time that independence means exactly that. And if you don't have a party apparatus, trying to build a third party by a Hail Mary throw at the executive branch to affect the platforms of the other parties is usually a waste of time. But if you don't have massive donors or a mass voter base, and when I say mass, we're talking about a nation of 330 million, where most of the largest organizations, period, usually have 100,000 in areas that are already predominated by people in the center of whatever ideological apparatus that they think is dominant, if it's a Democratic Party or the Republican Party. So maybe you can have influence on the margins, but you're not influencing that without a lot more resources unless you spilt the time to build it. We have, in my opinion, run through the entire gamut of the new left in about 8 years, what took them almost a generation to do. From Occupy to now is little over a decade. And the fads change every 2 years, on the right and on the left. The right today is unrecognizable from the Tea Party and Ron Paul movement, even if they had their stuff growing there. But the right has had an ideological project that's highly flexible in multiple institutions that are highly competitive with each other since the 60s. The left has not been able to figure out if it needs its own independent institutions or needs to tail the Democrats, and it's tried both in generational cycles for a long time. And that's not just in the US. It's been everywhere. Now, some places like France, there's more to do. The French left is more independent from the center, left, and center. Some of that is constitutional. Some of that is coalitional. We don't know what the new Popular Front's going to do. We don't know if it's going to succeed. We don't know how they're going to interface with Macron. But Mélenchon is an independent force. Bernie Sanders is not. Jeremy Corbyn is not. But people who've tried to throw a People's Party together or the Green Party together off the back of a napkin have basically created people who run for the executive as a kind of personality cult. It's straw Bonapartism, not even the real thing. And it's all changed now in a lot of ways. People are gonna justify whatever they're gonna justify to maintain their beliefs. They're gonna build all kinds of narratives. But I'm gonna read something from Freddie DeBoer. Freddie's not a person that I often get along with. I mean, we're friends. I shouldn't say get along. That's not the right word. What I should say is a person who I often deeply agree with. But on this, I think there's a lot to it. And so I'm going to talk about this today. This is from Freddie DeBoer's public Substack. It's a piece called Violence is Its Own Party. This is Freddie speaking. A while back, I wrote a very long piece detailing how an anti-internet terrorist movement might rise up and operate. Several people told me that it was like reading fan fiction, which I think is more or less accurate, even though I don't actually want what I described to happen. I was not excited about the possibility of the story coming true, just by the math I used to make the prediction. I intended the piece to be neutral about the morality or even politics of the imagined movement, focusing instead on the many infrastructural vulnerabilities in the online connectivity and our culture as fertile grounds for zealots and their movements. As for the former, I think in the era of discovering that many networks we built in the 20th century are more vulnerable than we thought, like supply chains that sag and break under the influence of COVID or Vladimir Putin or the Houthis. As for the latter, that's my eradicatable feeling that many millions of people live lives exsanguinated of meaning, and that this condition has not yet been exploited by committed extremists in mostly a matter of luck. I think it has been exploited, but just not by how people feel the lack of meaning. That's a different deal. Perhaps nothing so organized as a cult or terror cell will ever coalesce. Thanks to the deadening effects of iPhones, opiates, Xbox, booze, Amazon, porn, TikTok. But the opportunity is there for ambitious people enough to take it, and I don't even think you need to be that smart. Of course, a great deal of debate is going to be about the partisan identity of the would-be Trump assassin. He was a registered Republican. He donated to a progressive group. He was a gun nut. He was out to start Trump. You are, of course, free to engage, but I think you might be wasting your time. I also agree, Freddie. It's not going to tell us much. At best, I got a picture of some young person oscillating wildly in what they believe. One side will arrive at one answer which supports their political narrative. The other side will do the same in the opposite direction, and nothing will be learned. If he's your team, he says nothing about you or your candidate, and if he's the other team, he's the avatar of them and theirs. And about this kind of question, there is no truth, only use. Perhaps this kid was an Antifa radical. Perhaps he was MAGA, blah, blah, blah. He was definitely and existentially a doofus, a bumblingly and unimpressive product of the internet era and several different bad models for modern masculinity. Only moderately a loser, rifle club washout, 8th grader haircut, looks like a background character in a John Hughes movie, didn't even have the sense to drop out of junior college and conform to the stereotype. Not even an exceptional in being unexceptional, he found immortality in taking his AR-15 to a Donald Trump rally instead of to a middle school. He missed wildly, unthinkably, caught a piece of an ear, killed an innocent person, and maybe changed the course of American politics forever. Maybe. I'm not sure that he did or he didn't, but we don't know yet, Freddie. We don't know. And to think we could have stopped by any number of officers, any number of times, if anything in our system worked. Bingo. Why do I believe in decadence? This is why. Extremism is its own ideology, and violence is its own party. Actually, don't agree with this. I'm not exonerating anyone nor pretending that there's no such thing as political motivation for violence. Maybe the Trump shooter had a copy of Mao's Little Red Book, maybe Dianetics hidden away under his floorboard somewhere. Motives, as such, are uninteresting to me. You might define them as you like. Well, I think they are interesting if they're stated, but we don't have the stated thing here. I'm interested in the need. And what kind of need these fucking losers are not getting fed? What drives them? What hole inside of them can't be filled by Pornhub or Monster Energy drinks or Counter-Strike? It would be good to know what pre-political hunger drives some of them to politics, not because what they do isn't political, because politics is effect and not cause. Because the indelible image of the spectacular public violence in the 2020s is not an image of a Muslim suicide bomber or a leftist revolutionary or even of January 6th. It's a mousy kid that shoots up a school for lack of a better target. An 8chan terrorist, a disaffected loser whose parents' unsecured assault rifle relentlessly analyzed in political terms, but politically inert as a human soul. They are drawn to violence like mayfly to a porch light, driven not by ideology, but to the 21st century phototaxis of virility, the directionless need to seek the fame that attends carnage. A bunch of Mark David Chapmans with Discord accounts, just hanging around outside of Dakota, hoping someday they'll be the ones to sign the autographs. The Pulse nightclub shooter, a consummate loser, went to a straight club first and found it closed. Imagine farming out your target acquisition to Google Maps. Some say he was a radical Islamist, some say a homophobe. I say either way, he was a loser with the desire to inflict spectacular violence, which was undone by his inability to imagine anything spectacular. Can't tell you his name. This thing about these guys, they didn't even have the decency to make it memorable. 9/11, that was sight to see. John Wilkes Booth was a poser, but by God, what a pose. Shinzo Abe's assassin did it with a handmade gun. The verb, baby. That's the work of an artist in a lonely, pointless medium, our medium, the only creative act of endless processions with sweaty losers can think to imagine. What could be more American than the fact that all this has become rote, this perpetual spasm of obligatory attention given to young men whose evil is not sufficient enough to even demand the organic kind? Perhaps the only way this all ends when the peripatetic hikikomori violence that jumps from one impotent loser to another becomes a stale meme, something shared by boomers on Facebook. I hope so, because I'm fresh out of ideas. I tell people all the time, politically, the thing that twists the knife is that we can't even struggle and fail beautifully. You read about some other era and the losers look dignified, dressed in purpose. Now losing only makes losers. Well, that may just be time, Freddie. Maybe if you actually look at them, they don't look so dignified in their own lives. But nonetheless, and here too, in the arena of random and realistic bloodshed, we live in a sentient America whose reliable splashes of virgin-born violence are pathetic, even if they are tragic, pitiful even as we labor to memorialize the innocent dead. There is a Cormac McCarthy evening redness, and we are the forever rest, a musket-clutching frontier spirit haunting a nation bored and anxious children who think that to be noticed is their birthright. And they'll keep on coming, one by two by one, trailing body order, clumsily crunching guns they can barely use. Young men who feel neither young nor manly, invisible losers who lack creativity even in their desultory spasms of outrageous violence, leaving behind pathetically twitching corpses whose face and bodies and clothes tell the world in precise sociological detail why they felt they had no greater possible purpose than squeezing off around, even in death, good for nothing but sharing somebody else's meme. But that's the point of decadence. Things have become too complex. People can't analyze anything except in narrow fields. And in that void, all kinds of things run up. Hope grifts, senseless violence, etc., etc. But the funny thing about it all is one of these losers can change history pretty quickly. Which is why I had to re-record this video, even though I covered some of the same things that I covered in the two I took down and gave to my patrons. It's time for you to be the adult in the room, for you not to be the loser. Because spending your time posturing about politics is not the same as doing it. Nor is the discourse around a community the same as building a fucking community, a political establishment, a party, a union, because you're going to need all of them, motherfuckers. Too many disaffected people, men and women, because an economy that has shut them out. When things are well, you don't have mass stochastic violence. You don't even have mass politics. When things are bad, you have never-ending symptoms. Because a wrong life can't be lived rightly. Protect your peace. Like and subscribe if you want to. Keep your eyes peeled. Keep your head clear. Stay vigilant. I lived in an elected military dictatorship for 2 years. I had secret police, and I'm not making this up, because I lived across the street from a political prison, show up at my apartment while I was working after my visa had been invalidated with everyone at my job, at a school, just to make sure that they knew that I knew they were there, and to make sure that I didn't take a picture of the prison right outside my window when I lived in Ma'adi. Do you know what I did not do for those 2 years? Post about it on Facebook. So once again, either people don't believe what they're saying and don't think all the violence from these losers has consequences, or they do, and they are very, very foolish. And I say foolish now and not stupid, because foolish doesn't imply an incapacity. It implies an obliviousness. Don't be oblivious. Be the adult in the room. Keep your peace. Good day.